Welcome back to Speaking of the Spectrum, an autism podcast for everyone. Whether you are an autistic individual, whether you are a parent of a child on a spectrum, such as myself, whether you're related to someone like that, or you're not related to somebody with autism at all but are looking for your next conversational gem, this podcast, I guarantee, is for you. So please like and subscribe, support our organization that both my co-host Joe and I are privileged to be part of, and we represent the Autism Society Greater Hudson region. Hit our link in the description or our bio, and please donate a little bit. It goes a long way. And then my co-host, like I said, Joe, applied physicist by background, martial arts expert, human Kaizen expert, bestseller author for the book Everyday Excellence. And some say he is also the next Simpsons character in development.
Yeah. If I find you, kid, I'm gonna come and strangle you.
I was gonna think you were more like the Bumblebee man just because of the costume. When I first met you, you were in a duck costume. That's the one that comes to mind. Never mind all the other talents. I'm so glad that autism gives us this opportunity to meet folks like each other, right? And not only that, but it's also in many ways it adds a whole new lens through which to see the world. I feel, right? It's one thing to be in a social environment, and you can, as an autistic parent or somebody with some experience, and you can pick out you can tell which kid's autistic, what it wasn't. But it gives us a different way to see our world, our society, our culture, right? Even our relationship with our family and friends changes, because you almost find out who's really there to back you up and who just can't or isn't getting it, right? For us, for my family and I, the biggest game changer, I feel it starts. They say charity begins at home, right? It first starts with me. At least my journey was that, where we talked about when you first realize your child is on the spectrum, you get that first diagnosis, right? However early or late it is, you go through a period of denial. This is a part of depression involved, and then you get over.
It's really going through the entire grief cycle.
The entire grief cycle, right? And that takes longer than sometimes you think. Once it clicks in your brain, you're like, why did this take so long for me to get there? But once you're over that journey, then you start buying in your family, your parents, your siblings, right? Your cousins, your broader family. And then you go on to your society or whatever community. For me, it's like the Pakistani Muslim community, educating, being more upfront about it. And then your culture, and then society, and then nation, and hopefully a better world in the end, right? Autism helps you grow that out the moment you start to recognize it, which is, as a preview, our guest today has a very unique perspective. It's another pocket of our community we don't necessarily think about, and how they're struggling through different, societal dilemmas or taboos, what have you, right? And I feel like we're going to talk about that, but I think we also might even come full circle and realize it might not be such a unique thing to one particular culture that we might think it is. It might be more than that. And then speaking of, cultures and different, stats around the world, one of the things we use to kick off our podcast with is an autism fact of the day. So I Googled what are the top 10 countries where autism is the most prevalent. I'm going to run through this list, and you tell me at which point you start seeing a theme.
Okay.
Right? So this number is based off what is the prevalence per 10,000 children?
Okay.
Number one is Qatar, right, with 151. Number two, United Arab Emirates. So now remember, I mentioned earlier, we went to Dubai, and we were like, this place is so autism friendly, down from the airport all the way to the malls, and salespeople there even knew how to welcome my child and everything. So number two most prevalent is United Arab Emirates. Oman.
I'm starting to get a theme here, but go a little bit further.
Saudi Arabia.
I'm really seeing a theme.
Kuwait, Syria, Afghanistan, Palestine. Top 10. All Middle Eastern countries.
So, it's not something in the water. We know that it does not cause autism, and we know that vaccines don't cause autism. So, is it that it's maybe not more prevalent, but it's more recognized?
Yeah.
Because, you're Muslim, I'm Catholic, but, in the Quran and in Muslim traditions, looking out for the weak, looking out for those who need extra help is really more thematic and more reinforced. I mean, you have that saying that, if you're the parent of a special needs child, you've already earned your place in heaven.
Right. It's your ticket to heaven, right? And it even goes back to again, I'm being a little bit religious, but going back to our history goes back to our Prophet Muhammad, right? When he used to do these big migrations. It was like take this whole caravan of people and like thousands of people walk from one city to the other. He would make it a point that the weakest of the women and children were at the very front, right? So we've said
So they set the speed for everybody.
right to set the speed for everybody. We've said before that a community is only as strong as its weakest members. So that kind of thing is really ingrained. And also, I mean, I know the Middle East has a lot of oil, so they probably have more funding to fund this kind of thing. I know that's a big issue here. And one of the things we talked about in our very earlier episodes was that they even came up with a whole new term for it. They don't even call it handicap. They call it people of determination, right? Like, I'm going to say this many times again, and people have heard this from me to the point of nauseam, is that out here in the West, we, and I'm saying we because I'm including myself in this, right? This isn't a white American thing. This is the United States of America, our big melting pot of different cultures, right? We think of ourselves, and one of the reasons we migrate west is because we think we are the thought leaders in the world, right? And here we're still talking about autism acceptance, autism awareness. What is the right term to use? Should I use autism? Should I use autistic person? Should I use person with autism? We're still debating that. But out in the Middle East, for all their prevalence, top 10 countries have the most prevalent autism in the world. They're all Middle Eastern. They have come up with a term called people of determination because now you are past the awareness and the acceptance and the taboo. You are in that person's shoe because you know how determined that person must be to do a task that you take for granted. And that blew my mind. It still does, which is why I keep bringing it up any chance I get, right? And, you know, and again, like one of the things we'll talk to our guests today is about how, you know, different pockets of society, different cultures struggle with, I mean, even for all that the Middle East does for it, there is still a part of it, right? The other side of it, there's still people getting over that initial hump and realization that denial phase, right? Or whatever you want to call it, takes longer than it should. And, you know, we try to break that every day in everything we do.
Well, hopefully we can continue with the podcast and our outreach to be a catalyst to lower that, you know, activation energy for people to engage and be able to get the assistance that they need. And sometimes, as we were talking about in one of the previous podcasts, it's just saying, hey, man, I'm overwhelmed. Yeah, I just need a little break, or I need a little help, or, you know, I need 10 minutes of, you know, just pat on the back here.
Yep. And one of the things I talked about earlier too, and something I realized was that as parents, you got to give yourself some grace, right? I gave the analogy that one day you're just shooting some hoops in your driveway. The next day you get that diagnosis, and now you're in the NBA playoffs with the All-Stars, and you're not going to make every shot. Just know that you're not, and give yourself some grace. Take a breather. OODA loop we talked about earlier, right? Reset, act, go back and do it again. You'll incrementally get there, right? So when people ask me, how are you managing your day-to-day life with all of this, or how is your wife and you able to coordinate all of this? It's A, it takes a village, right? But B, it takes that, you got to give yourself that space, right? Like you're not going to make every shot. Reset, go back at it again, and eventually you'll find it. One of the things that my wife and I joke about with her son is that he's so smart, it's like playing chess with him, right? Like if we find a way to change his habit for one thing that's in our way, he'll find a way to counter that with something else. Like if he learned chess, he's probably we call him the chess master of the house, you know. And one of the funny things we always say is when we have people visiting our house or staying with us, like close friends and family, it's to the point now where we have a rule book. It's an unspoken rule book, right? That for him, the number one thing you want to know at our house, it's as important as taking off your shoes when you enter in, right? It's like, here's the rules. This is his spot, like Sheldon Cooper's spot. This is where he sits. You don't sit here. If he wants food, this is what he's asking for. This is how to microwave his food in this place. Like, we give them that bulletin, right? Like, here's how to support him. But guess what? Your stay is going to be that much more enjoyable. He's probably going to give you a hug, right? Which to you should be the biggest accolade. Like, yes, you're welcome. You've crossed the line. You're in my circle now, right? And, you know, as our podcast usually goes on, right, we talk about the fact, but then we also talk about a hero of the day. And this usually just means me the night before the podcast frantically Googling, trying to make sure I find somebody. But it's usually easy for me to find someone, right?
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere. And selfishly, what I look for in this person is to give me hope as a parent. Like if somebody's on the autism spectrum and then something amazing, that gives me hope that my child right now, who is, you know, almost a teenager, who can't speak yet, but still has so much potential in it, because if there's other people out there in the world who had the same kind of challenge, it gives me hope. It gives all of us hope that, like, you could be sitting on the next genius out there. What was the stat we talked about earlier in one of the episodes where 50% of autistic individuals have an average or above average intellectual capability? 85% of them are not employed.
Right.
That's a huge opportunity loss, but that's also to say that like there's so many smarter people out there. We interviewed Dr. Rodney, right, who was on Autism Spectrum, and his list of credentials eclipses yours. I'm sorry to say,
Yeah.
Joe, but like
Hey, he's got 2 PhDs now.
and two PhDs. He read the Wealth of Nations when he was 7 years old.
Yeah.
Right, like I Adam Scott, I can just quote the Invisible Hand and that's it. But he at 7, before he could speak, could understand and read it multiple times.
Yeah.
Right. So one of those individuals is Daniel Tammet. He's an author whose memoir "Born on a Blue Day" became a bestseller. So he can recite pi. So the physicist in you, he can recite pi up to 22,514 digits. What is the most of pi you can recite, Joe?
I just write the letter. I'm a physicist. Okay, we make it nice. And
I
easy.
just think of pizza when I think of pie. I don't even get to the numbers.
Now you're making me hungry.
Oh my gosh. He taught himself Icelandic in a week just based on a dare. Of all languages, he taught himself Icelandic, right? He's the subject of the documentary The Boy with the Incredible Brain. He participated twice in the World Memory Championships in London, placing 11th in 1999 and then 4th in 2000. So the next year he came back and like jumped a few spots at the top 5, right? They actually did a group study on him, and they reported that he uses strategies for encoding information with the sole purpose of making it more memorable, and concluded that superior memory was not driven by exceptional intellectual ability or differences in brain structure. So like when we
He's
talk
just
to
an average autistic guy.
just an autistic guy, right? Just like kicking ass. Wow. Right? When we talked to Dr. Rodney earlier, he even said how he has a cheat code that he uses to prepare for communication and different. Like this is exactly that. And we've also talked about that the more you learn about autism, if you start applying that to your own life as a neurotypical individual, things actually get better.
Yeah.
Right? You can. We've learned so many things in just the last 4 or 5 episodes. We're like, hey, if society or community does something for autism, it actually does it good for everybody, right? I gave the airport analogy in Dubai where it's a quiet airport. You get in there so peaceful. Please, can we do that at LaGuardia and JFK so it's not such a such a mess when you enter there? Can we at least throw a water fountain in there, something to soothe the nerves? Speaking of the spectrum and all the people involved in it, right? We're now going to turn to our guest. Medina Faizy-Hashemi, thank you so much for giving us time today. You are, to summarize, an Afghan Community Center support lead. And because I feel like today we want to take on a big topic that comes up to me a lot, I'm sure it comes up to you a lot too, which is, that cultural taboo we face when we become parents parents related to autism, right? And for that, I needed reinforcement, so I brought in one of the experts. And you're also a fellow podcaster, so welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us more about what you do for the Afghan community and what really led you. I love to ask the origin story question, right? Everybody is a hero or heroine on the show. What is your origin story? Where did it start?
So for me, it actually started in the parking lot of the developmental pediatrician's office. And that was the day that my entire life changed. My son was diagnosed with autism when he was 18 months old. And before he was diagnosed, I always knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to have a passion. You know how everybody has a passion project?
Yep.
And I felt like I haven't been able to find that. So for me, I was always involved in teaching Sunday school. Being an Afghan Muslim myself, I was always involved in teaching Sunday school, but I didn't get the fulfillment out of that. And then I was like, I got older and I decided to focus on my career. Then I started a podcast. But when my son was diagnosed, that's when I realized that I just want to be more involved in my community, not just to raise awareness on special needs and autism, but I joined, last year we created a youth group for our mosque. Mm-hmm. And in that youth group, the intention behind that was to have a place every 2 weeks for anybody to come. It's a place basically where you'll always have a friend. And being a support needs mother and my biggest worry in life is my son going to have friends. Yeah. That was kind of, we don't talk about autism a lot in that, but we have different sessions every couple of weeks. But the main, where the idea originated was just so people have a friend, anyone in the community, because there are people who just are socially awkward. There are people who it takes them a while to open up and to allow themselves to get comfortable with another person. So the youth group in my mosque is as a passion project of mine. And my origin story started in my mosque. And that's when I realized, seeing all the different people, the different personalities. And so that started my Afghan community support lead. That's where that originated. And then from there, I also, have a podcast where I like to talk about all the things that Afghans, not just Afghans, but also Muslims, I found you're Pakistani yourself. I feel like I found a lot of similarities in the cultures. And so basically I just like to talk about things that need to be talked about. And that's my origin. Being the youngest of 6, I'm always talking about things. I'm like, well, you made that mistake. You made that mistake. Let's talk about it. Let me learn from what you guys have done. And I've learned so much from my siblings. And I think my origin story is, it started in that parking lot. But I think my whole life, being the youngest of 6 in an Afghan household, single immigrant mother, I think I originated with the strength of my siblings. And then that parking lot discovered me.
that was your moment where the lightning struck and your superpowers kicked in,
yes.
And then you became the superhero.
It was there somewhere, but that kind
that was
of
the moment.
Yeah.
And that's what I talked about too. Like you pretty much are right in line with what I said at the beginning, was where you start with yourself, but there's really your immediate family, and then that's exactly what you did, right? Is you started with your immediate family, your siblings, you said, then you go out to the community, which you're doing at the mosque, and then society at large, right? One of the things I know you and I see a lot in common is that stigma in brown communities, right?
Yes.
Especially first generation from immigrants, or someone like me who's come in as an immigrant. Now I have a child on the spectrum. And then the more I get open, because if you haven't guessed already, I love to talk. My dad used to call me, his nickname for me was Chatterbox. And Dad, you're watching
all
Up and
foreign
Happen.
people love to talk.
Yeah.
All cultures.
I know, but he specifically called me like a his nickname for me was Chatterbox. And like, Dad, if you're watching from heaven, I'm behind a microphone now. So you were onto something. He used to do this funny thing with me when I was a kid, is that he would come home from work and he wanted to take a nap. And he called me over to his room. He'd be like, hey, come hang out with me and tell me a story. And I would start off talking about, I love superheroes, so I started talking about Superman, then I talked about how Superman ran into Batman, and it would go on and on and on and on, right, until he would fall asleep, and I'd walk away.
So you gave him his bedtime story.
I gave him, thanks, Dad, I gave you the lullaby. And then the funny thing is, when I was a teenager, one day he comes up to me as a birthday gift, he hands me a bunch of tapes, like for those of you millennials out there, you could actually have to record on a cassette back in the day. You don't have the digital media you have now. So he actually physically handed me tapes, and I was like, what is this? He's like, these are all the stories you gave me when you were a 6-year-old. He used to record them the whole time.
Wow.
And that was like
So
mind-blowing.
nice.
I was like, so here I am getting now everything recorded. But enough about me. So
No, it's okay. Keep talking. That was a sweet story.
That's a separate podcast on its own someday.
Enough about me. What do you think about
What
me?
do you think about me, But we talk about a lot of stigma in the brown communities, right? My personal journey was that just like many other parents out there, was like not to talk about anybody else, and like covered with something else. Oh, he's not engaging with kids because he's shy, or he's not running around because he's well mannered, right? Like manners is a big thing. I read a stat the other day, like I think it was South Korea, where they struggle more with accepting autism because they have such a huge push towards like academic excellence that it's a twofold impact, because now parents don't want to say that, hey, my kid isn't going to excel in academics, so they're hiding towards it more. So that's something they're trying to combat over there too. But that got me thinking that like this stigma that we have, right? On one side, we were talking about how Islam has all these great directives, right? Support the needy and ticket to heaven and everything. But then why do we still have this cultural stigma around us, right? Like, why does it get us to sit behind a microphone, right, and talk about it, to get it to others? Why isn't this just a thing that is known? Like, I feel like with how Islam or any religion is gone on, is that over the years we've forgotten the best parts of it, right? We've talked more about, hey, you should dress a certain way, or you should have a beard. I know that's hypocritical because I have one, but I do it for fashion to hide the fat behind my face. But
I did it so I could play Santa Claus.
See, what you do really well. But like what I'm saying is that we've gotten so ingrained into the superficial of it all. We've forgotten the basics of how religion and
The form instead of the philosophy.
right. It's like that's gotten behind it. So what are some of the things you've seen in the Afghan community around then? What have you done? Like, what do you feel like? Where's the opportunity there?
So specifically around, my son having autism. So
Or in general autism, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in general, so with our community, I'm going to talk about the Afghan Albany community that I'm in. Nobody wants to talk about anything that may not seem normal to them. it, like you said, it's the basics of the beard and this. And I feel like from religion to culture that it kind of stemmed through, it found its way through, because for our community, if somebody is, like, for example, women wear hijab in our community.
Yep.
If a little bit of her hair is showing, that's the topic of conversation. Is that a relevant conversation to have? No. Nobody wants to talk about the important things. So for me, I actually took a step back from my community years ago. And the biggest thing that I hear, especially around, stigma, is with my son, is they say, oh, you will let him watch too much TV, or no, there's something that we have in our culture, and it's in religion too. It's called Nazar. I know we brought it up.
The evil eye.
It's called evil eye.
Yeah.
So a lot of my son's, journey, they like to blame on evil eye. Oh, the biggest thing I've heard is like, oh, he was such a cute baby, and everyone thought he was so cute, and
and you put pictures up on social media, and now that's exactly what happened.
So
right?
that's what creates stigma, though. I mean, I feel like that's or not create stigma, but that's their stigma talking. They don't want to talk about.
It's so impactful, because to this day, if you go find me social media, there's no picture of me and my kids on there.
Did it stick in the back of your mind too?
It's stick in the back. I can't get past it, right?
Yeah.
I can't, and I'll go out and say it. Like, even right now, I feel like if I post even the fact that, hey, my son said this today as a Facebook post, I feel like that's gonna draw stigma.
But that is the stigma around it. So
Right.
I feel like, like what you just said. So I used to do that too. Now I post, and I'm like, what we have to do is to remove the stigma, and the only way we can do that is to talk about it.
Yeah.
And what you guys are doing, that this is a
Speaking
step
of the spectrum.
speaking of the spectrum.
Yeah.
In our communities, no one wants to talk about it. Let's just have a conversation.
And see, coming from an Irish community, we'll talk about anything. I mean,
wow.
there's, there is some still, things that are verboten that you don't talk about. But there's a saying that with the Irish and in the Dutch community, I've got a lot of Dutch friends, is there's a line, it's back there because we blew right past it. So,
I would have never guessed.
Yeah, I'm bold, okay? But this is one of the things that, as you're going along in the journey as a parent, you realize, you know what? That doesn't matter. So I'm going to talk about it. That is minimal. Okay, so like my kid's hair is all messed up. Who gives a damn? All right? He's got pants on and he's safe. That's a good start for today.
Yep. That's exactly it. It's like the things we start taking as huge accomplishments are taken for granted for like non-autistic or neurotypical kids, right? And we celebrate every little thing he does, right? The fact that he sleeps through the night, frankly, is a big accomplishment. Like, we have more nights where we haven't slept well in comparison to nights where we do sleep well. It's like today was another day we didn't sleep well. Big deal.
So you look for those little joys, those little victories, and you're willing to say that does not matter in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. Right.
And people who don't have exposure to the neurospices like we do, they just take it for granted until all of a sudden they have somebody in their world that completely disrupts it. Yep. I have a friend who, has got multiple kids, and then their youngest was diagnosed as the spectrum, and I'm like, he's on it. I've been saying it for years. But all of a sudden it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
So it just completely disrupts it, and it's like, now you understand why I allow certain things with my kids. It's like, no, that's not going to cause too much problem, and the trade-off is worth it. In those stages.
What's funny you say that, because we are the first we're the first open family in my community.
Oh, wow.
My son is the first one in all of my time of growing up. I've lived in Albany my whole life, where I openly say he has autism. And I feel like I try not to let the pressure get to me, but, I then found out people come up to me because I was open. A lot of Afghan mothers are messaging me.
Yep.
And they're like, you're my hero. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, not. They say.
Line was back there, Joe.
Yeah. We're not there yet, but they say, hey, don't tell anyone, but a lot of the signs that your son was showing, my son is showing. What did you do? It's like a secret. They want to have a top secret conversation, which I will fully respect, because every parent deserves to.
100%. Yeah.
They deserve to handle it and come to terms with
but that's
however they
bubbling
want.
under the surface, and at some point, the line's going to move.
Yep.
Yes.
Because there's enough people in the community that have a child on the spectrum that's not really talked about, where it's going to start being talked about, and that moves the line.
In the last 2 years, the word autism has been used in my community way more than it's ever been used in my whole life. I didn't even know what it was growing up.
Kudos to you.
No, not just to me,
I mean,
to
I'm just
all
saying,
of us.
right?
Yeah.
But that's
But
like
someone
Voldemort.
has to start.
Seriously, it no longer is it he who cannot be named. It's like, no, name it.
Yeah.
You remove the stigma, remove the fear around it, and we can address it and make things better for
I
everybody.
mean, one of the things that keeps me going and doing what we do for the Autism Society, right, is like I don't get paid for this. We all have a lot on our plate. I would rather be sleeping right now. It's early in the morning on the weekend. If those of you haven't guessed already, are sipping coffee here on the side, trying to sneak away a sip, right? I could not be doing this, right? I could rather be spending time with my kids right now, making them breakfast or something, right? But what really clicked in me, what changed me from like not resigning or like keeping on doing this was when people, like you said with yourself, was started coming to me within the Muslim community. Like there was a point when I made it public that I'm on the board of the Autism Society Greater Hudson region, was every single community dinner or party I went to, at least one person came to me, pulled me on the side and said, hey, my child, my daughter, even in one case, my husband is on autism. And I never knew that.
Yeah.
Right. And then they start asking, like you said, like, hush, hush, but what have you done?
Right.
We talked about in the last episode about what it means to being bold. Right. And the most staggering thing is, like, I know we've been, sort of putting a lot of blame within our own communities right now. But I do a similar thing. Like I mentioned earlier, have a bit of an autism support family group at work, too. And there are people who have come up to me in some company, in not necessarily within the company, but, within our professional network, right, who said on the side that, and again, these people are not from our brown Muslim communities or anything, right? And they've said the same thing. Like I'm like, hey, why don't you come out and talk more about this? Same thing. They have a stigma too.
Yep.
It's I know
not ready yet.
Not ready yet, or like no. And then even those who do reach out for help are like, yeah, tell me, but like don't tell other friends we know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, look, the friends you and I know are the same people. They're the same friends who are supporting me and my
They're
kid.
supporting me, they'll support you.
And they're starting to see it in your kid because they're understanding some of the tells that the kids have. And so they're like, oh. And so it's you're a superhero again. I'm coming back to this. And, thank you for the origin story, because we have a responsibility, but there's also some risk around it. And we keep our secret identity in a lot of ways. But eventually the mask completely comes off and everyone knows who Peter Parker is.
Well, my brother always taught me actions speak louder than words. And I feel like the last few years of my life, that has, been the motto of my life. Because when they see me talking about it, and when they, when they see this podcast and the fact that I'm talking about it, I feel like, like you said, we can blame communities, but it's everywhere. I have a coworker who, ever since, I started working here, she always tells me, she goes, I'm telling you, if 60 years ago they had that, I would have been diagnosed. And she tells me all the time, she goes, I know I'm on the spectrum too. And, and she comes up to me and it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because she's an American. She's not Afghan. She's not Pakistani. And she tells me that, she knows that she's on the spectrum. And the fact that I'm open about it at work, like you said, in your workplace, I'm, the only one in my job who has a child with autism out of 40 people. And the conversation is had, and I actually feel the responsibility is there, but I feel very, I feel like my mission has been accomplished when people do come up to me. Yeah. And whether they want to be hush hush about it, I know that that's temporary, because I have an autism support group via text message. Anybody can join it. It's mostly a lot of the people who I know in the community who've are now comfortable to talk about it as a collective group. And I hope it can turn bigger one day. But, the girl who was telling me 2 years ago not to tell anybody is now talking about it to everybody. That's awesome. So if we just have to respect their temporary, request to keep it hush-hush, but our responsibility is let's get out there, let's talk about it, and, from there.
Yeah, let's keep speaking of the spectrum.
Yes.
So to sort of conclude things here, we have our Adam Projects section, which if you've seen the movie, it's a Ryan Reynolds movie, Adam Project. I love time travel. Who doesn't like Ryan Reynolds, right?
Hugh Jackman.
Except Wolverine, yes. Deadpool 2 or 3 is coming out.
3.
Yeah, 3 is coming
summer.
out with it. Yeah, that should be interesting, but also R-rated, so we won't talk more about it here. But Adam Project, for this purposes podcast, it serves 2 purposes. One is to get Ryan Reynolds' attention, and number 2, Adam stands for Autism Dads and Moms. So Autism Dads and Moms Project, we try to get our collective tips and tricks that we've used as parents or from our listeners or viewers. Send us in a comment. We're on Instagram, YouTube. You can find us easily. Send something in. But since this is 3 of us here, Do you have anything to share, Medina, as your Adam project? What is one of those you feel like an aha moment or like something you like to share with other autism parents about something you helped like manage the day to day or de-escalate this, whatever. What is one of the things that comes to your mind?
So for me, it's buy the stuffed animal. Who cares if your son is 7, 8? I'm sorry, my son loves stuffed animals and water. And, you know, if it, who cares if you have 45 in your house? And when I look at my house, I get sometimes at
They
night
think they're
I
all
get,
yours.
Huh?
They might think they're all yours. Stuffed animals.
When I have my dining room does not have a dining table. It has stuffed animals. I have a zoo. And the funny thing is, I don't know if you relate to this, but like we're not raised around animals, so I'm terrified of dogs, as every Afghan is. I don't know if we're terrified of. So sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night and I see, I walk to get some water, I see one of his stuffed animals. I think there's a mouse in my house. And I'm like, oh my God, like this brown thing. And I'm like, what is that? So I'm not familiar with the Adam Project or the Ryan Reynolds movie, so I don't know if this answers your question, but the aha moment for me is just buy the stuffed animal. And if your house has 45, just look at it and laugh and smile.
I really like that because for us with my kid, it's a stuffed animal called Scout. And I'm half going to say it's annoying because it's a one that makes sounds and
oh, those are the worst.
Right?
The Mickey Mouse pressing the button and it dances. I'm like,
yeah, it has no off button.
Elbow.
And I talked earlier about how my son is like a chess player, so that Scout has a volume control, so we can take it low. He's figured out.
Yeah.
He's opened the back part of it where you can like take he's gotten rid of the cover because he knows we'll finally turn it down, and it's always with him. He's holding it close to his ear and it's playing. All these
they're the most innovative
all day.
Children I've ever met.
Yeah. and when it comes to like just getting them whatever they like obviously toys that I would like to get for a 12-year-old, right? Like when I was 12-year-old, action figures, right? Cars, monster trucks, whatever. He's none of that, right? So instead what we do is we know he loves his iPad, right? An iPad's an expensive device now. As a parent, you wouldn't think that a kid will need more than one iPad. But that's what he loves.
We have 3, by the way.
We
have a tablet and 2 iPads.
Thank you. We have 2.5.
Not including his communication device, so 4.
So we have you beat there. We have 2 iPads, and they're the nice big ones, right? They're not like the big ones. One is charging, one is always in his hand.
Yes.
Then we have the communication device from school, and then we had to buy what my little son calls the little red iPad, which is not really an iPad. He'll probably find out when he grows older. It's like a $50 Fire Stick something, right? That he uses when he sees his brother is it. But my wife and I, at one point, we got for his birthday each year, right? Like, this kid doesn't play with toys. What can we get him to make him happy? Get him another iPad. Because the rest of the year, he's not buying anything, right? Like my younger one, who every time I go to Target, I got to shell out $20-$30 or something, right? With him, it's like that once a year, that $300 expense for the year.
Just do it.
Yep, just do it. On that beautiful Nike note, just do it. It's a wrap. Thank you for listening and watching wherever you are. Please like and subscribe. Every click helps draw support for the Autism Society, Greater Hudson region. This has been Speaking of the Spectrum. We'll speak soon. Bye-bye.